All right. So excited for this panel. Earlier today, we had a panel on progressive decentralization. This is kind of like the opposite of progressive decentralization. This is start decentralized from day one with all the mess of all these different stakeholders and try to figure out something that works. And I think we have two of the best examples of this with Sushi and Yearn. Two of the, I think, at least for me, like the best stories coming out of DeFi Summer. And two of the most successful projects that have started this way. So I guess maybe to start, just love to have you guys like introduce yourselves and then also just really kind of describe what that process was like during DeFi Summer when both Sushi and Yearn launched and kind of what that was like to start decentralized from day one.
Sure. Hey, Maki. I'll start. So I got brought into DeFi when Andre gave away $1 billion in YFI tokens last summer. I didn't really know much about DeFi at the time. My friend messaged me, buy wifey. We call it wifey. You can call it whatever you want. And I took a look and I was like, oh my God, here's this guy with such integrity and principles that, he wasn't trying to build some giant, money pyramid. He was trying to make his code, which was dope, and have a community of people around to help with it because he knew that he needed that community. And DAOs were pretty new at this time. We didn't know how to build community from scratch. And generally, you start with leadership and centralization, and you progressively decentralize it into the community. But Andre, in his classic chaotic good fashion, just released the whole thing and was like, okay, you guys deal with it. And so I came in and we had no ability to, there was no leadership, there was no structure. It was like, I think of it like the Big Bang. It was like just total chaos. And all these people called in because it was so cool. And we had to figure it all out from scratch.
Maki?
Yeah, very similar and very similar question to track. For me, Sushi kind of started with literally just hopping in and speaking with Nomi, and from there I just said like, I want to help. I can do whatever you guys want. I will be ready to serve. And it kind of just stumbled into, I'm very inspirational by Yearn and kind of the way things formed there. And I was at the first seat. I didn't partake in governance or anything, but I was just fervent, wifey maximized. And then afterwards, literally, it all comes down to whenever there's a decision, whenever there's something that needs to be done, it needs to be done by consensus, by voting, by the community. And every single step along the way, it's not kind of my decision, but it's our decision. And that really kind of stepped the tone, I guess, for the ethos and how to decentralize further. And ultimately, I do think this is going to boil down to, on-chain governance in a more kind of, in a more extravagant way. But so far, we've been going at it as much as we can in the capacity that we have available today.
Kind of what were those early days like for both the projects? I mean, you kind of mentioned it was this big bang. There's a bunch of tokens that are being distributed, a bunch of people, but how do you actually build an organization? And what was kind of key in the early days to get right so that you could actually have something that was sustainable, right? I think in both cases, you basically went from being worth nothing to being worth over $1 billion in a matter of weeks, if not months.
Yeah, so to start, we didn't have any facility for decision making that was legitimate, right? Because legitimacy comes either from leadership or it comes from processes or a community that works to create that type of legitimacy. So we had no way to make decisions because Andre wasn't making the decisions. He said the DAO, the wifey holders make all the decisions. The only decision-making apparatus we had was wifey voting. But if you try and take every decision that an organization needs to make and push it through a coin vote mechanic, you're fucked, right? There's a lot of different types of decisions you need to make. And most of the time, this all happens behind the scenes, but we were trying to really do it in an authentic, upfront way. So one of the key milestones was YIP 41, where people like Substrate and Vance Spencer and Bull Trapper and myself wrote a proposal to give the multisig, which was a group of 9 people responsible for controlling the treasury and protocol interactions, the authority to spend some money for paying people And at that point, there had been this incredible group of some of the most talented developers and designers and creatives in the space working on Yearn and not making any money because we had no ability to pay them. We had no authority to pay them. So we created this delegated authority, which was the beginning of our delegated decision-making model for governance.
At Sushi, initially, what was very funny is since there's almost nobody, there's only Nomi, there's myself, there's Sushi Swap Chef. There was no structure at all. It was just we wake up, we work, and then at some point, when we started to hire people and contributors that have been doing very well, so seeing some people like that are still involved, like Jiro, Makase, and so on. That's when structure, I guess, started to form. That's when we started to have like more like notions and so on. And similar to Yearn, we had like the same exact problem where like every single decision taken by vote was not ideal. So we started with this proposal called the Growth Fund, which was basically like an allocation to a set of core dev, 200,000 sushi per month that could be used discretionally. So we were able to do marketing, we were able to hire people from this fund, we were able to provide liquidity in some other protocols, etc. And that really kind of kickstart everything in a more kind of, that accelerated the pace. And that's how we were able to grow from 4 to 20 plus in the span of few months, like 6 months or so. That was kind of a pivotal moment when you get like trusted people, the resources to execute not just their vision per se, but to onboard as much possible, like other contributors, contractors, and then you get some amazing things.
Yeah, and you kind of touch on this in what we were saying around, once you have the organizational structure in place, like how do you properly incentivize all these different contributors? Because you could have the case where you had people who are contributing that just happen to, farm a ton of Wi-Fi in the first 2 weeks or farm a ton of sushi. And they're now incentivized for life because they own so much of it to make number go up, and they'll work for it. But you also have some people who did not farm Wi-Fi or sushi, but saw their project later and maybe were inspired or wanted to contribute. And how do you get those people to basically contribute on a full-time basis? So obviously with Wi-Fi, there was the buyback in builds. There was like the mint, basically creating ways that you can get some Wi-Fi to properly incentivize these people. But just like how do you guys think about approaching that challenge of incentivizing many of these like later contributors who are now working for your projects now?
Maybe I can go first track. At Sushi, what was very interesting is very early on, Chef Nomi set the example where anyone that wanted to do a small project or anything related to sushi could basically ask for 50K. If this was over, we had like a vote by the community. And I've kind of perpetuated this thing where anyone that wanted like a dev, anyone that wanted to design integrations, was able to basically just go in the forum, pitch the community, and if this was reasonable, we were sending half of the fund upfront. I think we only got burned one time where like nothing got shipped, but in the end, usually everyone was able to ship down whatever they pitched, and in the end, that kind of built this very cool community of builders on top of sushi. And at the very end, we were able to hire most of these people that were asking grants, and that bolstered, I guess, our contributor base tremendously. So. There's no committees, there's no kind of grant system. It's more like, it's really more ad hoc, informal. And maybe this needs to change a little bit more because, if this is available to more people, individuals, maybe there's going to be too much flow. But ultimately, it's worked tremendously well for us at Sushi. And I think more organization out there should potentially do the same. No need to pay people to sit and review like application. It's just the people that are working and doing the work are just going to come out of the low, I think.
Yeah, compensation is one of the areas that I'm kind of most fascinated by, and I think it's one of the areas that really needs more DAO tooling and more support, because in DAOs we've gotten pretty good at making decentralized decisions around proposals and things, but compensation is often done in the same old way, where it's top-down decision-making, interviews, somebody gets a contract, and then maybe that's rubber stamped by a coin voting process. But at Yearn, what we did is, in the beginning, as soon as we had operational authority to spend some money, is we created some recurring grants, and then we created community grants. And in learning more about the science of incentivization, it's kind of fascinating because it's one of the places where business operations is so far from the science. Like, the science has been established since the 60s around human motivation, incentivization, that most if-then rewards or carrot and stick rewards serve to disincentivize people. You know, problem-solving time for open-ended tasks gets extended when you give people a reward afterwards. It's because we have an inherent motivation system. And you see this a lot in DeFi and in crypto. People just want to create. You know, as soon as you start giving them money for it, they're like, fuck this. You know, they don't want to do that. They don't want to be part of the old garbage, you know? They want to create the natural energy flowing through us to make things. And so we need a compensation that supports that. And so what we did at Yearn with the community grants is we just did gifts, you know? You didn't have to submit a proposal. We just saw people in the community that were doing cool things, and we just gave them money, no quid pro quo. But the problem was that there was a small group of people that were doing this gifting, and there's a large group of contributors, and it just wasn't a good cognitive apparatus for that. The collective intelligence that can arise from that configuration of beings and matter is pretty weak. So we invented a new system called Coordinape, which fully decentralizes compensation. All you need is a budget, a group of people to receive that budget and a reason, and everybody in that circle, the gift circle, can make decisions in how they want to gift each other, and the final allocation is fully decentralized, which we built to serve Yearn and is now spinning off as its own project.
Yeah, so Wi-Fi and Sushi are what's known as fair launches. And arguably before Wi-Fi launched in July, there wasn't any fair launches since Bitcoin, right? This kind of idea that you have a project where in the beginning it's possible for anyone to come and contribute, get a meaningful stake in the project, and help and eventually become a leader. So I kind of with that kind of baseline of like having been a fair launch, you also get to design your organization from scratch. Like, there's no core team that is inherently, a governance structure of its own, right? People can just kind of join and assemble on their own. So you obviously mentioned how, in the early days you got decision making in place and designed an organization around the small community. But as both your communities started to grow into not just like a few people, but tens, hundreds, thousands of people, how do you scale these communities and kind of design like the proper governance structures around them?
Sir? You want to go, Maki? Or I'll go.
Go first.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's really challenging, right? Because power begins to accrue to people that are around, and we only have a certain number of relationships. And so then it just becomes very comfortable to make decisions. And once you hold certain roles of power, it becomes harder for other people to be empowered to do things. So what are we actually trying to scale? Like, the Yearn protocol has thousands of users, right? We're trying to scale that. The Yearn community has hundreds of users. We're trying to scale that. And then there's also kind of core community of people that are like full-time contributors, and we're trying to scale that as well. So they each scale in different ways. One of the key things to me is creating a governance system that supports this new way of working, right? And that's what we did with Gabe Shapiro, and I wrote the Constrained Delegation Governance 2 model of decentralized governance, where it threads the needle between coin voting and autonomous decision-making of small teams. And it allows for we enumerated all the decisions that you need to make within Yearn. There was like on-chain decisions. There was 19 different types of decisions that'll become NFTs. These are specific decision-making powers that YFI holders can vote to delegate to small groups, Y teams of 5 to 10 people, to give them authority to make decisions within that space for Yearn. And because it's all on-chain, it can be observed, it's transparent, and YFI holders can vote to retract that decision-making power if it's not being used well. And what's important about this in considering scaling is it's all transparent, right? Any group can come together and make a small team and say, hey, we want power to do something. So it really opens the door for people to come in, and be part of the system. It's still pretty early, but it's things like this that are required, if you don't want to just replicate the mistakes of the corporate world.
Maki, do you have a?
Yeah, I think for us it's been quite different, and that's I think that showcased like how much Yearn has been thinking about all these problems, because for us it's been way more top-down approach and kind of regular kind of structure where we have like a group of core individuals, and basically like if you want to join, you can apply via like the forum and so on. You can have like a proposal, or like you can just literally like pitch whatever you want to be building, and then we add you to basically like all these kind of web of Telegram channels and um, groups, and from there things get done. We have like a month trial, and then when people are quote unquote sufficiently trustable, we start to onboard them in a more serious and official manner. It is not perfect. It is, in my opinion, like far from the ideal that we are kind of pushing. And ultimately, when the structure, like the Yearn, the Y team that Track is talking about, are going to be more, I guess, not solid, but easy to replicate, then we're going to see more adoption on the DAO front. For us, I don't think it's up there, and potentially like it cuts the door, or close this off to some individuals. But usually, like the ones that are like onboarded involved are kind of 100% and full time. There's I think only one contributor that is part time at Sushi, and that is in part why, I think, in my opinion, because once they get in the wheel, there's so much to be done, so much to do, that they just don't have energy for anything else.
Yeah, so I think like a common theme across both projects is that I think what you learn is that delegation is often what is needed to allow these organizations to scale as more people get involved. I think maybe like a counter perspective that someone might have is, you know, is decentralization even possible, or is hierarchy something that you always need in these organizations, right? Because in a sense, like when you introduce things like Y teams, you're almost introducing, at least on the surface, like hierarchy, right? Like teams and leaders. So maybe it's a broad question, like what kind of decentralized governance is possible, and what is the case for that these Y teams are like this new model of decentralization and not like a corporate hierarchy?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and something we've thought a lot about. Total decentralization is the heat death of the universe, with trillions of black holes, point singularities floating in space, right? That's not the type of corporate governance or organizational design we're looking for. There's somewhere in between, and decentralization is a gradient, and there's nothing fundamentally wrong with centralization, right? So we want to create, and there's nothing wrong with hierarchy either. Hierarchies get a bad rap, like the sun is bigger than the earth, like can't tell me otherwise. They're not the same size. That's a natural occurring hierarchy. Like if I'm talking to a quantum physicist, that dude knows more about physics than I do. That's a hierarchy, and I like that hierarchy. I want to learn from him. What you want is natural flowing hierarchies. They're not constrained in a rigid way. Most corporate systems have rigid hierarchies. You have a boss and you have a direct report, and these things are established. It doesn't matter if you know more about physics than this dude. He tells you what to do. We're creating a system where leadership and hierarchies can flow naturally in whatever context is appropriate. And this is really different and really important, right? So we're not just, by having small groups of people, that is not a problem. That's actually the way all things happen. There are asymmetric accumulations of information and wealth, and these things are okay. Scarcity is okay in these contexts. What you want is to make it open, transparent, mobile, equal opportunity, accessible, flexible. And that's what the new governance we're making. Often, like, you look at this type of governance, you're like, oh, well, it's just like corporate governance. But it's similar, but it's really different. Like, people often ask, like, isn't a DAO just like another type of LLC? In a sense, it is. It's just much better in a lot of other ways. Like, there's the story of human coordination has gone from families to religions to nations to corporations and now to DAOs. And really important things change in the worldview of the people and the substrate that supports them all along the way. Now with DAOs, we have the immutable blockchain. You have permissionless shared ledger, trustless environment that can support all of this stuff on top, all this transparent and flexible human organization that we're building now. So even though it might echo the corporate environment, that is a space built on military-backed governments and central banks and asymmetric power and entrenched power and old rule and things that don't move as well, right? So that difference is substantial.
For us, it was like pushing a lot like I have a small background in, like kind of anarchist organization and so on. And I was really a big proponent of consensus, consensus among community members, consensus among core developers, consensus about everyone. And I can tell you for a fact that it fails. I think, like hierarchy are important. I think there's a place for them, but like very aligned with what Tracheo was talking about, like flowing hierarchy. I won't be dabbling in things that I don't know or that I feel like someone is better suited for. But ultimately, I think decentralization as an idea, as an utopia, like we like to see it and talk about it often, is not going to be where we think it's going to head. But anyway, that's kind of my take on it and kind of my experience.
Do you think this model for building an organization starting completely decentralized is something we'll see more of in the future? Because I think in one respect, it's harder to do a fair launch today than it was when you guys did it, right? Because now there's, when you do a fair launch the same way that Wi-Fi did, well, people have expectations of how much money they can make if they're an early farmer. If you do a vampire attack the way that Sushi did, people have expectations of how much money they can make. So in a way, like these launches don't become fair. They attract a ton of speculation, a ton of capital, and just more like kind of mercenary interest in these projects. So I guess is a fair launch possible today? And if so, like what does this mean for the future of how we design organizations? Is this something that is desirable? What is the role that I think these decentralized first organizations play in the future of organizations?
I think personally we're going to see more, not necessarily more of them, but we're going to see still like a bunch of them happening. But they need to have like checkpoints, like at the very beginning to make sure like everyone has the same opportunity. I was a big fan of like what inverse finance or float protocol did when like it was whitelisted to only like a bunch of people that actively participated in like these protocols and made sure to basically, I guess, on board or have the right people. It's not like a perfect system. I don't think there's anyone right now that exists to my knowledge. Maybe I'm wrong, but so far, like it tracks like a very particular kind of people, like people that are not necessarily there for the money per se. They're like more looking for joining these type of communities and building them. That is the most important part because that's really kind of aligned with their mission, with their ethos, and that is the beautiful part of this fair launch organization. Then you have like the other side where today there's so much capital available. You can easily raise money if you do have like a group of sensible, technical-oriented individuals aligned with the same mission. And I think this is highly powerful. These team, by the way, and if anyone is listening and wanting to do the same, you guys can ask way more than you expect, first of all. And on the other side, like building in public, building for fair organization, this is not easy, especially with all that it comes with the community. Some people are obsessed with number go up. Some other people are, in every single time zone that you can imagine. You're gonna wake up at every single hour of the day and finish very late. So overall, like there's not a perfect model, I think, but it is bound to happen. Not necessarily more, but in general.
Yeah, I think the concept of a fair launch needs to be examined a little bit. It's another one of these things that we tend to think is monolithic, But what's the fair part and what's the launch part? You can launch a token, or you're launching a protocol, or you're launching an NFT drop. Fair to who and fair how? And I think we're going to see a lot of different diversity of these things, and we're seeing with NFT drops, these are a form of fair launch in some ways, right? But with Yearn, it was like, there was a protocol that was making money and needed to be tended to, and the YFI token was launched as a community coordination tool, as a way to bring people in to start operating this protocol. And Andre did it in a very smart way. He had a four-step, there was 4 different ways that you could farm the Wi-Fi token, and they were each different key parts of DeFi. So he was bringing in specifically the people that he needed to that community to build that thing, and that was fair in that way. But you can think about other forms of fair launches too, right? And there's nothing wrong with VCs either. They're just people, right? What's wrong is with, you know, poorly incentivized deals. But, you know, you can, you know, some of the problems with fair launches, right, is that, well, we suffered at Yearn is that, okay, all the tokens got to the people that farmed and then the people that bought, right? Is that really exactly the community that you want? You want to be able to incentivize the contributors too. They're the ones that are building it every day. How do they get the token? How is it fair for them? So we had to do a pretty, you know, that Ryan was, you know, part of this pretty miraculous proposal to mint more wifey to pay the contributors, because the fair launch didn't really work for that. But maybe there's a way to do a fair launch where it's fair for contributors, right? Think about like contribution mining instead of yield farming. There's a lot of new options there.
Yeah. So what are some lessons you all have learned about building these communities early on and getting to the point where people are excited and they want to engage? I think, you know, one of the things people always say when they bring up sushi or Yearn is they always talk about the communities, right? About how there's just so many cool people building here, involved, whether it be investors, builders, community leaders, Twitter shills, like this, everything is kind of there. So what do you think was key to being able to build these communities? Was it like memes? Was it just like providing opportunity? Was it just making the earliest people rich? What was it?
Well, I think this is something that Maki has done so extremely well with sushi community. Yearn has struggled at different times with this, mostly because we caught so much shit early on. I mean, there were so many dramatic situations and problems, and like a lot of the people that were building Yearn were just getting like death threats and like yelled at online all the time, and so we like just receded, you know. And I think we have to do some work now to open up even further, and particularly around transparency. So we have this great new governance structure, but if you're not really plugged in, like it's hard for you to tell what's actually going on. So we've been working a lot on how do we open up things even more, because I think to build community, you really need to welcome them, you know, and you need to make it open so that people can be a part of your thing. But yeah, I think, again, Maki's done this really well.
I mean, I think, you know, on track, and, you know, yeah. I think it's because mostly we went through, I guess, like a shitstorm, like in the very beginning of sushi, like the way kind of everything went down with Nomi leaving, the rug pull and everything. And when, you know, we kind of stayed there and, you know, we went through this, we decided to, like, even for myself, I was at the point where I'm thinking, oh, this is over. I'm going back to my day job, and this DeFi adventure is over. And then, you know, like the community actually said, like, no, this is not how it's going to go. We're going to hire you, and, you know, like, we're going to get back on track. And the fact that I stayed there, the fact that I was communicating with everyone, the fact that we were updating at every single way, miles, you know, like very early on, for the people that remember in sushi per se, I was literally posting every single day my change log of what I was doing. And that kind of provided like this extreme transparency for like holders and contributors and community members, and everyone was still kind of keep on going, because like regardless of what happened, regardless of like the price of the token, we were still like just building because we had first fun, second of all support. I didn't just walked away like Nomi and some other people too. Like they just kept on iterating, kept on talking. We had like these community calls. We had these updates at all kind of miles of the way, and that really fostered like this very strong community, I guess, of just contributors and members. And at the end of the day, like the fact that we've always been so open about like every single step. So along the way, they've been supporters. You know, memes were created to among like community members, among like the I guess diehard holders and so on. And from there, it's just been a pleasure, you know, like being involved with this community. And I'm gonna still be there forever. I think it's just now I'm slowly kind of fading into an advisory role, but the contact we had with the community is undoubtedly why I guess we've been so successful on this front.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the great panel.
Thanks a lot.